Of course, I've been an observer of Kanye West for years. As you may remember, I defended the Sunday service when many of my colleagues in church leadership were condemning him, or at least questioning him, or challenging him, or shunning him. So I have been an admirer of Kanye West, and certainly being a director at two publicly traded companies, understanding what it means to have stockholders, understanding what impacts the stock market, understanding and watching what impacts the value of a stock and the value of a company, the cap rate of a company. I was very, very attentive to the fact that this rapper, essentially, who became a fashion executive and a creator of fashion with his own Yeezy line, did a deal with Gap, a publicly traded company, and that deal with Gap caused the value of the stock to go up in one day as high as 42%, and it landed around 28%. When the value of a stock of a publicly traded company goes up 28% in one day, that is not insignificant news. That is major capitalism at its best. And to think that a musician had grown his brand and had strategically built his business empire to the level of impacting the stock market in one day, I was very attentive to that and very happy to see it. And so Kanye West has become a brand and a mogul far in excess of perhaps what he even thought when he was just doing beats and mixing songs.
Martin Luther King didn't get killed because of I Had a Dream. He had something else he was going to talk about: black empowerment, economic empowerment. So, when I did the Forbes and I showed them the $890 million receipt and they still didn't say billionaire, they don't want us to know that we can buy land.
Dr. King did put major emphasis in the night before he was killed on black economic power, both for the purpose of building wealth and using our dollar strategically. Dr. King talked on April 3rd, 1968, about not shopping in certain stores if they didn't hire black people. No question that Dr. King was talking about black economic empowerment. His opposition to the war in Vietnam was in large measure moral, as it related to the Vietnamese people, and it was also economic based on the amount of money the country was spending on war as opposed to addressing poverty. So Dr. King was killed as a threat to the socio-economic and cultural status quo in the country, and to simply say Martin Luther King was not killed only because of his dream, that is accurate, but it still blurs an understanding of Dr. King for those of us who have worked very closely with the King tradition and the leadership around Dr. King. I think he has to refine the manner in which he weaves together the narrative to ensure that there's a cause and effect, there's an if-when connection. And that's what I think he wants to work on.
They don't want us to have the 100% ownership that I have 100% ownership at Yeezy.
This "they don't want" conjures up images of a conspiracy that at very high levels may not exist as much as people think it exists. I'm not sure the heads of the major industries sit around at lunchtime really trying to figure out how to keep black people out.
It's time to strike the final blow against the Brotherhood.
There's an assumption, sure, there's an assumption at high levels that there aren't enough black Americans or African Americans or black people who really have sufficient acumen to sit at that table. I agree with that. But because of that perspective, in their minds, there's no reason to try to keep us out because we don't even know where the door is to the room. And I've sat in enough rooms now over the last 20, 30 years of my adult life to be disruptive just by my presence. And when I raise a question about black people, which I do on a regular basis, it's almost a surprise. Oh, really? It's more out of sight than it is in line of sight from a negative perspective. There are probably people, no, there are definitely people who don't want us coming to Louisiana, coming to Mississippi, going to Texas, flying into New Mexico, or even New Jersey and New York. There are definitely people who would prefer that black people not buy land and own assets, definitely. But there is so much land available in this country. There are so many assets available in this country that where one door is closed, another door is open. So the Bible says all things work together for good. That has to be our philosophy. That when one door is closed, you have to believe that it's for your good and something better is around the corner.
There's a gentleman in jail in Houston, Rodney Reed, that all the evidence says that this guy didn't do it. He's supposed to be executed in 30 days. And all the celebrity black will tweet about it. But the question is, would they stop playing basketball for a week?
From a strategic standpoint, if the NBA were closed for a week because the black players refused to play, I'm not sure that would impact black inmates that are incarcerated unjustly and put enough pressure on the criminal justice system to demand their release. You see, and so your legitimate stardom and your legitimate successes start to chip away in terms of their impact and credibility by your stepping out into an area where you are not qualified to lead. And no one is qualified to lead in every area, no one. But Harry Belafonte, Sammy Davis Jr., and those entertainers of the 60s, they didn't organize their own demonstrations. They didn't articulate their own visions. They came to support Martin Luther King Jr. Jane Fonda rallied to support the Black Panthers. Again, I'm not suggesting that people should stay in their lane as much as I am urging people to do what they do very well and leverage that on behalf of support for leaders who do what they do very well. There are people who deal with the issue of black incarceration very, very well. And articulate support for those kinds of people make more sense than jumping out there. And what happens is your credibility is diluted somewhat, despite your many successes and strengths, because you're in space that you have not perfected on the level of your creativity in music and other spaces.
For black people, I just say, don't just be a demographic. Own your power. Your power is not just to vote Democrat for the rest of our lives. That's not the power, just voting on who they told us to vote on. That's not what the power is.
Since neither the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party makes us their priority, then young men like Kanye West, I believe, are onto something. I think Killer Mike has a similar kind of perspective. These young people understand that since neither party is going to make us their priority, perhaps we should be looking strategically either at having an independent third party, which we've tried in the past and it never really happened, but we should be looking at that, at least in certain instances, or we should have an agenda that we present to both parties, and the one that commits the most is the one that we support. At this juncture, we are so emotionally tied to the Democratic Party on a national level that could never happen. I served as Secretary of State in a Republican administration, but I never lost my credibility or my focus or my connection with the black community, even when I disagreed with black leaders on a number of things. Because again, the issue is not Kanye West. The issue is not DeForest B. Soares Jr. The issue is whether or not we are using our platform and our position and our access to power on behalf of the larger community. It's not a matter of whether people like the way I vote or like who I support. The issue is whether or not I'm a part of a larger strategy that contributes to the welfare of future black generations. That's the question.
When I run for president in 2024, we're going to definitely know what y'all laughing at. When I run for president in 2024, we would have created so many jobs that I'm not going to run, I'm going to walk. What I'm saying is, when y'all read the headlines, Kanye's crazy, this is that, it's like 1 in 3 African Americans are in jail. And all the celebrities are in jail also, because they can't say nothing. They have no opinion. They're so scared.
When you hear Kanye talk about possibly running for president, if you look in his eyes, he's not completely playing with us. I think there's a piece of him that says, well, if Donald Trump could do it, I could do it. I'd love to see the strategy precede the announcement. That's the key. Kanye has had not only production, but marketing and distribution strategy before a single is released. Same is true with his fashion. Strategy should precede announcements. And when strategy does not precede announcements, then we're kind of shooting from the hip and no one has to take us seriously. And we move on from subject to subject. And so if we want to advance the culture and then let the culture advance the cause, then I think, as I always think, strategy should be our priority.
And the reason why I say these things out loud in this way is so I won't be killed. I said it out loud already. This is what. But last year, I was killed by the press for having a difference. Not having a difference in opinion, for having an opinion.